Hello and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Adita Karkera, Chief Data Officer for Deloitte's Government and Public Services. And today I have the great privilege to be talking to Kirsten Dalboe, Chief Data Officer for Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Kirsten, welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's always fun to chat with you, Adita.
I'm so happy to have you on the show today, Kirsten. Well, to start off, maybe you could give the audience a little bit background about your career and your journey to this point, being the Chief Data Officer at FERC today.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this question is always interesting because I think those of us in the data space, there's no real career progression for those of us in the data space. That's really just starting for the younger generation, right? So my background is that I have an undergraduate degree in engineering, specifically civil engineering. And when I was getting my degree in engineering, I really liked the idea of building things. But as I was getting towards the end, I realized I liked the idea of building things, but didn't actually want to rappel off of buildings and bridges and things like that. So I ended up finding a job as a systems engineer. So my first job was for SAIC as a systems engineer supporting the Navy. We were building mine warfare countermeasures project, and a software program. So basically, we're looking for mines across the world's bodies of water and trying to remove them. And so what really became obvious to me as I was working on this project is that it is all about the data, right? So I ended up kind of taking on the whole environmental section of that software. So, bathymetry, how deep is the water, the bottom types, the bottom characteristics, the optics, the acoustics, the magnetics, all of those things play into how we determine what we're called technically similar regions to determine what types of mines might be in different types of bodies of water. And so as a systems engineer, I was designing user interfaces. I was writing system requirement specifications. I was writing test scripts. I was writing interface control documents and designing data sets. What was how would the data be designed to be able to be read into the system? I would travel and meet with the scientists down in the Naval Oceanographic Office and understand more about the data and then how we had to be able to read that into the system. And so through a lot of that job, I kind of realized that all of this really comes back to data. The technology, the software is kind of the vehicle for that, but it's all about the data. And so I really loved that job. It was really fascinating. It was a great introduction into the world of technology and data. But I also didn't want to become the world's youngest expert in mine warfare. So, and it's a fascinating world, but a pretty niche world. So I ended up moving into more international development for a period, and then control of the currency, building out, helping them figure out, standardize how they did a lot of their risk assessments, which really, again, came back to the data, making sure that there were consistent ways to think about the data, define the data, so that all the bank examiners across the country were doing it in consistent ways, which means we had to have consistent definitions around all of these different data points. I eventually then had the opportunity. I got my master's degree in technology management, and I got a position still as a contractor at the Department of Homeland Security. I moved in there originally as a customer engagement manager, meeting with a lot of different DHS components, understanding what their technology needs were. But so much of all of that really just came back to the data. And then at a point when I was at DHS, the Undersecretary for Management really pushed. I mean, this was probably 2010, 2012 timeframe. The Undersecretary really wanted more consistency in our data, better data reporting, better understanding of dollars, people, assets, resources, types of things. And because of my background in a lot of the underlying systems, source systems, I was asked to lead that project. And so that was really my official entrance into the data world. But because I had so much background in understanding the data in all of these underlying source systems, I was pretty well positioned to start building out that program. So that program was called the Cube, the DHS Cube. And I was the inaugural program manager, program director for that program, getting that up and running. And then as I was building out that program, the position for chief data architect became available, and I ended up becoming the chief data architect at the Homeland Security. And at this point, I had become a federal employee. And so that was just a really fascinating position, thinking about such a large agency, how we all collaborate about our data, bringing all of those different components together, getting us all to talk the same language around data. So I was at DHS probably all told about 9 years, and then decided okay, I've done a lot of fun, interesting things here at Homeland Security. Was this all a fluke, or can I do this again? So there was an opportunity then to move over to Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General as their Director of Data Operations. And so I moved over there, and that was a new office standing up. So again, inaugural position there to stand up all of those data operations functions. So I was there for about 2.5 years, and then the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act became law, and agencies were hiring for chief data officer positions. And so that was always, I guess, a direction that I wanted to go. I realized I wanted to go. So agencies began hiring for the CDO position. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission was hiring, and so I applied for that position and got that position. So now I've been at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, I think as of last week, 5 years now as a CDO. So that's kind of the longish story of how I started and how I got into the data space. But I guess I've always been into I like the idea of building things. I really like technology and how it facilitates modern life and all of the things we do. But the fact that data underpins all of that, the technology is just the vehicle, the mechanism, but it's the data that is the thing that is the value to this. I mean, technology exists to service data, so we need to make sure that we do the data piece right.
I couldn't agree more. And I love how you said it. The data really underpins everything that we do here, right? And wow, listening through your journey, Kirsten, what a fantastic journey you've had in the public sector, moving from DHS to HHS to FERC. And even before that, it sounds like you've always been in some of the very front runner data roles. And congratulations on 5 years as the CDO at FERC. That's probably one of the longest running federal CDO roles, if not the longest, maybe. So congratulations on that.
Well, right, I'm getting there. There's a few that beat me. I know Dan Morgan at Transportation beats me, but they're not. I think I'm getting to be one of the long-termers, definitely.
Yeah. Well, congratulations and thank you for your service, because every year I know we're maturing in the data landscape in the federal industry, right? And you also serving in your role as the Chief Data Officer Council's chair. We're going to talk more about that soon, because I'm really excited for you to be chairing that as well. But before we dive in further, Kirsten, as you were talking about being the first CDO at FERC, tell us a little bit about what that meant to you. 2019, when the Evidence Act came up and agencies were hiring for the CDO role, it was still pretty early, right? They were still figuring out what is expected from the CDO role. So tell us a little bit about that journey. And then would also love to hear where the CDO role is situated inside FERC and what are your specific roles and responsibilities today?
Yeah, sure. Right. So to back up just a little bit to give some context about FERC. So FERC is a small independent regulatory agency. We are not part of the Department of Energy. Obviously, we have connections to Department of Energy given the commonality of our mission space, but we're not actually part of the Department of Energy. So we are a small independent regulatory agency. And there is a cohort of us small independent regulatory agencies, which I've now being at a regulatory agency kind of find it a fascinating space just because we're regulating an industry, but we tend to have small staff sizes. So FERC is only about 1,500 employees and we have a budget of around 550 million. So if you compare that to my time at DHS, where, budgets in the many, many billions. I mean, I think when I left DHS, the budget was maybe around 65 billion, if I remember correctly. And so if you compare FERC's budget of 550 million, that's significantly smaller than what I was used to seeing at DHS. And similarly with staff size, I mean, we're 1,500 people, whereas DHS was, depending on whether you counted, Coast Guard military, the civilians, the contractors, 400 to 500,000. So it's a much smaller space, but you're regulating a whole industry. So the relationship with data is very different in the sense that we get large volumes of data externally. We're not producing a lot of our own data, rather we're getting a lot of data externally. So that's been an interesting paradigm to think about in terms of the data space. So FERC's mission is economically efficient, safe, reliable, and secure energy for consumers. For the fact that we are a pretty small agency, we have 13 program offices. So that's a pretty large number of program offices considering our size. And those offices span many different areas: legal, policy, market regulation, engineering, agency operations. So we have anywhere from administrative law judges to fish biologists on staff. We do a very wide range of things. And so, and that creates a wide swath of responsibilities, skill sets. We have lawyers, economists, energy industry analysts, biologists, civil engineers. In some ways, this is my first job that really truly connects back to that civil engineering space. So I've never actually gotten to use my civil engineering degree, but now I get to work with people finally who do have that civil engineering degree. And I did
never know.
I know. I mean, I did get my engineering training certificate. I just never actually, practiced in that. But now I get to work with those people, right?
There you go.
And so I sit in what's called the Office of the Executive Director. This is effectively kind of a headquarters or management function for the organization. So, this is where the CIO, the CFO, the Chief Security Officer, the Chief Human Capital Officer, that's where we all sit. And I technically do report to the CIO. And so for the purposes of what we need to do for FERC, I mean, that works well for me. Again, we're a small organization, so in some ways creating another lane maybe wouldn't make as much sense. And because of the work that we do and how closely I have to partner with all of the different divisions across the CIO, it's been working pretty well for us. So, as I was kind of alluding to, data facilitates all of the things that we do in terms of there's just the general sort of administrative and operational work that we do. I mean, we get a huge volume of requests from the public, from the industry. So we need to be able to track all of that day-to-day work, those work activities, make sure that we're meeting all of our statutory dates. So there's a lot of data coming in and making sure that we're processing all of that correctly, making sure we're not missing any of our statutory dates. There's, of course, all of just the HR, the financial, the contracts type data that we have to keep track of, make sure we're managing that well. Huge volumes of the filings that we get in, making sure that we're addressing all of those filings. Then there's just all of the mission data. So one function that my office takes on is there's something called the Paperwork Reduction Act, for those of you who don't know that outside of the government, but that is the law that sort of really drives how the government can request data from the public. So anytime the government requests data from the public, it needs to go through this Paperwork Reduction Act process. It needs to be approved by the Office of Management and Budget. We have to go through 2 public comment periods to allow the public an opportunity to comment on the data collection that we are going to be asking for. We have to do burden analysis on that data to assess how much time we anticipate the data collection to take, and then what dollar figure does that take? If it's going to take 10 hours of a civil engineer, what is that dollar figure? So FERC has, I think currently about 115 active information collections with industry. And that's a pretty wide array of data where we're getting just general sort of compliance filings, so that the data just to ensure that some entity is asserting that they're complying. So that's a version of data. But then we also get lots of market data. We get performance metrics of operators. We get power generation data. We get trading data. We get weather and seismic data. So we get lots of different data. And we're using this data then to monitor the markets. We're trying to detect fraudulent behavior. We're trying to anticipate reliability issues on the grid, inspecting energy infrastructure, as well as then economic and geographic impact analysis of our regulations. So it's a pretty wide array of data. So my team then, we have the mission to support FERC through leadership, governance, policy setting, advisory services, and collaborative outreach to optimize our enterprise data and information assets. So my team has 2 branches. We have the data policy and stewardship branch. We have the data engineering and analytics branch. So I kind of really see these as like the 2 sides of the data lifecycle. So my data policy and stewardship branch really is on the front side of the data lifecycle, where we're building and maturing our data governance. We're trying to improve the broad coordination across the whole data lifecycle. We have a data stewardship framework, and partnering with all of our program offices to work with all of the stewards across those offices to make sure that we're fully cataloging all of our data assets, that we're managing all the metadata around that data, that we have someone who is identified as that steward who takes on the responsibilities of a particular data asset, and they know what their job is to do that. So we have office hours facilitating a lot of that, kind of coaching services, helping our stewards perform their function as a steward as effectively as possible. And then we have the data engineering analytics branch. This is the later half of the data lifecycle. So that team is building out an analytics platform. So this is our cloud-hosted data and analytics platform. We want to be able to provide easier access to all of our data. So as I mentioned, we're getting huge volumes of data in from the public, from data subscriptions, from many different places. People need to be able to find that data and work with that data as effectively as possible. So, so that team is really making sure that we have a well-functioning data platform. We have all of our data pipelines, ingesting all of these different data assets into the platform, that data is then findable, and then that we're providing the right tools and technologies to facilitate analysis. So, business intelligence tools, data science tools, geospatial analytics tools, data science notebooks, all of those types of tools. So those are broadly my two branches, and the responsibilities that we have, and lots of partnership across the whole organization, right?
Well, let me just say, you are a great role model. So thank you for being there, and thank you for all the work that you do to mentor other women to come into this space. And also thank you for all the support with the federal government chapter for women in data. So Kirsten, thank you for your efforts, and thank you for being with us today and sharing all your perspectives with the audience. It's always great catching up with you, and thank you for sharing all of those experiences. For the audience, please continue to visit our websites. There are so many more great perspectives lined up for you. So be sure to check out those Deloitte and CDO magazine interviews out there. Thank you.